Hi, welcome to the Letcher County History Show. My name is Richard Brown, and today we're going to be talking about a little community at Dry Fork in Letcher County and how many soldiers came from that one little creek. Last year, we were attending and participating in the memorial here at Veterans Day, and as we left, my dad, Glenn Brown, had rode with me, and he turned to me and said, I was looking at all those names of all the killed in action and noticed some of the Dry Fork boys. I said, I wonder how many soldiers came off of Dry Fork, because I think there was a bunch of them. And I said, well, that's your homework assignment, Dad. You go home and start writing them down. Well, he did. I just didn't think much more about it. The next night he called me and said, guess how many names I've got? And I said, probably 20. He said, no, more like 50. And I said, that's a lot of names. And he said, yeah, but I'm not through yet. I'm going to start calling all the neighbors and the relatives and keep making a list. Well, 50 turned to 60, 60 turned to 70. Next thing you know, it was up to 130. And you're talking about a creek that's just 3.5 miles long. It's 3 miles north, kind of northeast of Whitesburg, northwest, I mean. And it's apparently it's been populated enough to supply a lot of soldiers, men and women, to the United States Armed Forces. Well, Dry Fork Creek, for a history of it, it was, of course, it must have been named in a wet season about being named Dry Fork. No, wait a minute, Dry Fork, so I guess it was named during the dry season. But it was, it's been mentioned as Dry Fork since the early 1800s, because I've read patents of land that mentioned Dry Fork in the early 1800s. One of the first settlers to settle there was Stephen Caudle. He settled near the mouth of Dry Fork, and he was a Revolutionary War soldier, and he moved here from North Carolina. Then his son-in-law come with him, John Quincy Brown, and John was a veteran of the War of 1812, and so both of them settled here on Dry Fork. Then another gentleman settled here about the same time, Joseph E. Cornett. He was very old at the time, but he turned out to join the Confederate Army during the Civil War. So all three of the early settlers were veterans. Well, most of the people off of Dry Fork are related to these three. Plus, there's been, but not long after the Civil War, some Cooks and Tyrees moved on to the hollow as well. So, pretty much everybody's kin to these 5 families and extended ones. Well, another part of Dry Fork was they had their own post office, like all small communities, and it was called Crown. And I've always wondered where the name Crown come from, and from what I've been told, until I hear a better explanation, is that when they went to make the post office, they had to have a community name, and they couldn't settle on one, because you had a bunch of Browns, you had a bunch of Cornets, Caudles, Cooks, so they decided to compromise and call it Crown. The C was for the Caudles and Cornets, and the brown part for the Browns, of course, so it made it Crown. And that seemed to satisfy me, at least until I hear something better. Well, so now they had a post office, and a road ran through there, but at that time it was just a trail. Well, the people in the neighborhood would all go together and work on this road, and they were obligated to, actually, but you only had to make it good enough to travel a horse on. But the Browns and the Cornets, the Caudles and so forth, all went together and worked hard on it and made it into a wagon road, and it come over Smoot Gap and into Dry Fork, down by Loggy Hollow, and down the middle of Dry Fork, then up Little Dry Fork, and crossed over into Just Day Hollow at Whitesburg. And all the way from Smoot Gap to Whitesburg was a trail that could be traveled by a wagon. It didn't have a name at that time, of course, but later on during the Civil War, that part of the road was part of what called the Rebel Trace, because the Rebel Army used that road a whole lot to move their troops back and forth through from one part of the country to another. Well, then as it went on, you had more and more people move in, and so you had soldiers from all over. Actually, residents, then soldiers, civilian soldiers. They started out, like I said, with Stephen Caudle being the American Revolution. He's buried at the mouth of Dry Fork, and he's got a very nice Revolutionary War tombstone. It was set by the DAR and by the Historical Society. And right beside him and his wife, is his daughter Elizabeth and her husband, John Quincy Brown. And he has a nice veteran's stone as well, the War of 1812. It also was set by the Historical Society. And this little cemetery is just at the mouth of Dry Fork, and it's very, very old and very, very nice though. And I'd encourage anyone to visit it if they'd like to see part of their history. Well, as time went on, more and more wars came along, and World War I came along. We sent off several men to war from there. Then, of course, World War II, then Korea, Vietnam, all the way up to the present war in Afghanistan and Iraq. And all along, soldiers from these wars come off of Dry Fork. Well, during World War I, several came off there. One of them actually was killed in action, and that was David Brown. And more fought. My great uncle, Dimmer Richmond, he lost his lung due to being gassed over in France and Germany. So that you can see that there's a history of soldiers coming from Dry Fork. Well, in my own personal family, I had 6 great uncles that was in World War II. That was Woodrow Caudle and Gay Cornett, Ivel and Hobart, McKinley, and Arthur Brown. All 6 of them were my great uncles, and all 6 of them fought in the World War II. And then also, I had some even closer family that was there, and I have some pictures on here that to show you. And my uncle Lloyd Brown was in the Navy. He was on the USS Mississippi, and he was wounded in action in the South Pacific. And he has one of the distinguishing of 2 residents from Dry Fork to be listed as killed in action, but they're not. Neither one, or both are alive and well. He's one of them. We'll talk about the other one in a minute. But he is listed as killed in action, and my grandparents received a telegram from the Navy stating that he had been killed in action, and for 3 days they grieved for my uncle, of course. And on the 3rd day they received another telegram. This time it was saying there'd been a terrible mistake made. He'd only been wounded and not killed. So now you had went from losing your son to gaining him back again. But the Navy, in their, I guess like all government facilities, they still have him listed as killed in action. If you go to the Navy War Book, you'll look under William Lloyd Brown, and you'll see him be killed in the South Pacific. Then on his brother, which is my father, Glenn Brown, was sent to Germany. He was a tank commander. He was a staff sergeant in the armor division, and he was in an M46 tank. Some people called it the Patton tank, and he was in Germany. He took a lot of pictures, which I'm glad he did, because today we can see what it all looks like. And we had one distinct picture that he had taken and bombed out in front of a cathedral in Germany. And when my nephew, his grandson, got sent to Germany in the Army, he's also a staff sergeant. He went and hunted up that one particular site there by that cathedral in that courtyard, and he stood in almost exactly the same spot that my dad had stood 50 years earlier, and had his picture taken standing in front in his staff sergeant uniform in the same location. So I think that's pretty unique. Well, then I have another uncle. This is another one of the brothers. He is Private Earl Brown, and he was also born on Dry Fork, and he served in Korea, and he had a distinguished career in Korea. The Stars and Stripes, the Army's official magazine, run a feature on him because he was declared Soldier of the Month during while he was in Korea. And luckily he got to come home back, but he died later on of cancer. Well, so you've got three of my uncles, and I'm with my uncles and my dad, and their other brother Roy. He also wanted to join, and every picture of him as a youth, he either had on a Army hat or a Navy hat, one of the two, because he was dying to be in the Army. But unfortunately, he was diagnosed with brain cancer, and at a young age as a teenager, and he was never allowed to join the armed forces. But it wasn't because his heart wasn't in it, it's just that his health was not in it. Well, I also have two nephews, and one of them, Michael Campbell, he is stationed right now at Fort Bragg, but unfortunately, in 2 weeks he has to go back to Afghanistan for his second tour of duty. The photo that you're seeing now is of Mike when he was in the Kringal Valley as they was getting ready to set up an ambush of the Taliban patrol. Of course, nowadays, every soldier carries a camera with him, so it's not unusual at all to have photos of combat scenes and so forth, because there's so many cameras there. These small digital cameras can go, they even have them on their helmets anymore. But unfortunately, Michael's going to have to go back to Afghanistan, but I'm sure he'll do fine. He's in kind of like a special forces. They're taking 4 of them, 3 sergeants and a captain, and dropping them off in a village there in Afghanistan, and they'll be living for the next 6 to 9 months by themselves with the Afghans, trying to help them do better with their infrastructure. Then also, I have another nephew that's in the U.S. Army, and he is now stationed at Fort Leonard in Missouri. Unfortunately, last night and during the Joplin tornadoes, they had to put all the soldiers in the bunkers because the tornado come through there as well. But no soldier was injured as far as I know of. But Brent is the son of Keith Adams, who's also from Dry Fork, and he lives right down below me. So I've got 2 nephews currently serving, and I'm sure there's other people off Dry Fork currently serving as well. Well, I'm very proud of everyone that come off of Dry Fork. Every soldier, and not just the soldiers, but think about it, the families always were affected as well. Mothers, wives, children, they all had to take and sacrifice the loss of their loved ones, not necessarily the loss in death, but they were gone for a long time. So sometimes they would have to fend for themselves. So actually, when you go into the military, not just you are affected, your families and other families are affected as well. So always think of that. When you see a soldier, be sure you always thank him, or at least smile at him, because they're willing to put their life on the line for you and me. Well, I know I've probably missed some people when I made this list, but we tried our best. And after I read this list, I would like for anyone that knows of any other soldier that come off of Dry Fork to please inform me of such, or at least inform my father, and we'll correct it. I'll read these names in a few minutes and tell us. A lot of them we know their father's name, and I'll give them as well. At this time, I guess I'll read the names of the soldiers. All right, these soldiers are prior to World War I. We had Stephen Caudle, which I told you about, Revolutionary War, and John Quincy Brown, War of 1812, son of Valentine Brown, and then Benjamin Brown, which was the son of John Quincy Brown, and his son, James W. Brown, both served in the Union Army. And of course, Benjamin, he was killed in January of 1865. He almost made it through the war before he was killed. Then you had Jesse Marlin, Hiram, and William Brown. They were all the brothers of Benjamin Brown. They were all the sons of John Quincy Brown. They all were in the 14th Kentucky Infantry, U.S. Then you had Jacob Cook. He was in the Civil War. He was one of the cooks that moved in right at the time of the war. Then you had Joseph Cornett. He's the one I talked about earlier. He served in the Civil War. He was the son of William Jesse Cornett, which was a Revolutionary War soldier as well. Then you had John Baxter Cornett and Samuel Cornett. They were the sons of Joseph Cornett, and they were in the 13th Kentucky Cavalry, Caudle's Army, the Confederate Army. John Baxter was my great-great-grandfather. Then you had William Tyree. His family moved to Dry Fork just prior to the Civil War as well. Well, then we got them broke down from soldiers from World War I to the present. All right, starting off, we have Brent Adams, son of Keith Adams. Then you have Danny, Ray, and Paul Adams, all sons of Riley Adams. Then you had Fred and Vernon Adams. Then you had Clay and Billy K. Banks, sons of Jim Banks. You had Ray Boggs, son of Charlie Boggs. You have Jeffrey Brown, son of Arthur Brown. Jeff was in the First Persian Gulf War. Then Willard, Ellis, and Howard Brown, all sons of Ben Brown. Then you had Stephen, Dixon, and Ray Brown, sons of George Brown. Ray was killed in action. Then you had Lloyd, Glenn, and Earl Brown, all sons of Henry Brown. Henry was my grandfather, William Henry Brown, and Florence Kathleen Richmond Brown. That was my grandparents from Dry Fork. Then you had Frida Brown. She was the daughter of Glenn and Fern. That is my sister. She was in the U.S. Air Force. Then you had Oscar Brown, son of Jim Brown. Then you had Troy Brown. He was the son of Jim I. Brown. And if you'll notice, the next couple of names are, Jim Brown was a common name, and when they did, a lot of times they'd give them nicknames, like Jim I. Brown. Well, Gary Brown was the son of Jim Bud Brown. That way you could tell which Jim you was talking about by giving them a nickname. Then you had Raymond and Ralph Brown. They were the sons of John Brown. Then you had David Brown. He was killed in action, son of Johnny Brown. Then you had Chester Brown, son of Larkin Brown. Then you had Arthur, Ivel, McKinley, and Hobart Brown. They were all the sons of Shade Brown. And Shade was my great-grandfather. And, of course, those was my great-uncles that I told you about earlier. On the side note, McKinley was in the Coast Guard. They got torpedoed during a battle one time, and they had to close off his compartment. And they thought, though, that everyone was killed in his compartment because that's where the torpedo hit. And so when they sealed that compartment off, he was the only man left alive in there, but they didn't know it. And for 2 days, he was in that floating water with all of his buddies, and all of them were killed except for him. And finally, someone happened to pass by after the battle had died down and heard him beating on the bulwark. And, of course, they were tickled to death, and they got him out. But he suffered a lot, because a lot of times he would think back to the time he was sealed in with all of his comrades. And I'm sure that was very hard to take. And going on, we've got Michael Campbell, son of Frida Brown Campbell and Johnny Campbell. That's my nephew. Then Burdell Caudle, son of Arthur Caudle. Woodrow Caudle, son of Watson Caudle. Edgar Cook, son of Lewis Cook. James Cook. Then Hatler and William Cook, sons of Has Cook. Then Philip and Arthur Connor, sons of Dave Connor. And Leander and Stanley Collins. Then you had Oscar Cornett, son of Charlie Cornett. Then you had Paul and Ray Cornett, sons of Charlie Cornett, a different Charlie. And you had Melvin Cornett. Then you had Verlin and Venters Cornett, sons of Joe Cornett. Then you had Vernon and Gay Cornett, sons of John H. Cornett. Vernon and Gay are my great-uncles. Sam Cornett, son of Mary Cornett. Then Ronnie, Jack, Dempsey, John, Jerry, and Michael Cornett, all sons of Monroe Cornett. You had 6 sons all going to the armed services. Then you had Burchell and J.B. Cornett, sons of Watson Cornett. Then you had Fred Cornett, son of Willie Cornett. Then you had Holly Craft, son of Ike Craft. Now, Holly lived up above me, and when I was a young boy, I would go and sit and listen to him tell stories of the war. And in one story, when they were all starved to death and they were out in the snow, and the snow had been building up forever and they froze to death, he was manning a machine gun, and he was on watch, and he heard the crunch in the snow, and he knowed it was the enemy coming up on him. So he got the machine gun ready, and just as they stepped out of the pine thicket, it turned out to be a deer instead of the enemy. But he shot it and killed it anyway, and he crawled out through the snow and drug it back into the encampment, and they started skinning it out. And about that time, an officer come along and wanted to know who shot, and of course they told it was Holly. And when they went up, and he jumped all over Holly, but then Holly asked him, well, do you want me to take and drag this thing back out there? And he said no. Said go ahead and fix it and eat it. And so it ended up working out for the best, so they got the best meal they had had for a while. But I just throw that out there for an instance. I always talk to these people, to soldiers, because some of them have really good stories they can tell you. And continuing on, you had Bruce and Darrell Day, sons of D-Day, and you've got Randy Frazier, and then you got Carmel Hampton. Now Carmel is the other one I was talking about when I said there were two listed as killed in action. Well, Carmel was in Korea, and he was wounded badly, and he was listed as killed in action. So, but he was with the U.S. Army, so it didn't matter which arm of the service he was in. Either government service could make a mistake, and in their case, they did on him as well. Then you had Clyde Hampton, son of Alan Hampton, Elmer Hogg, son of Steve Hogg, Venters Holcomb, son of Fred Holcomb, Dennis and Oscar Holcomb, sons of Joe Holcomb, Charles Holcomb, son of Johnny Holcomb, Ulysses Gene Horn, George Willie Hensley, son of Wilson Hensley, Ken, Fred, Earl Arch, and Leonard Howard, all sons of Les Howard. You had Jerry Lucas, son of Ernest Lucas. Eli Lucas, who was killed in action, was the son of Naaman Lucas. Then you had Richard and Dan Lucas, the sons of Sam Lucas. And then Jeffrey Lucas, the son of James Lucas. Then Watson, Dan, and Ed Perry, all sons of Charlie Perry. Then you had Willie, George, James, Claude, Jack, Ralph, Anna Sue, and Joe Reed, all children of Joe Reed. That was 8 children. Can you imagine what their mother thought? And then you have Harrison Stidham, son of Eli Stidham. Then Jeffrey Stidham, which is the son of Harrison Stidham. Jeffrey served 3 different tours overseas. Then you had Don Tolliver, Comus Tyler, Herschel and Clyde Tyree, sons of Andrew Tyree, Local Tyree, son of Billy Tyree, Amos Tyree, son of Kurt Tyree, Winkle and Eunice Tyree, children of Elick Tyree, Fred Tyree, Little Garfield and Massey Tyree, sons of Ira Tyree, Clarence Tyree, son of John Henry Tyree, then Garfield, Jody, John Henry Tyree, sons of Sam Henry Tyree. Then Bertus Tyree, son of Willis Tyree. Then you have Van Warricks, son of Virgie Warricks, and Billy Harold and Bobby Whitaker, both sons of Astor Whitaker. You had Michael Combs and Kelly Sexton, the sons of Jammer Sexton. Of course, Michael and Kelly were both in Iraq. Well, that was the list, and I'm sure, like I said, I probably missed some. But I'm proud, very proud of each and every name that was on this list. And now Dry Fork is not by itself. There's nothing special about it that's not any more special than anywhere else. Because if you go into any hollow, to any creek, you're going to find this same thing. So I would encourage everyone out there to look around them, to look in their creek. Go look on Smoke Creek, look at Dunham, anywhere, and you're going to find this same thing. You're going to find that you're going to be surprised how many soldiers come off each and every one of these hollers in Letcher County. Because, like I say, Dry Fork has not got the standard here. It's just that it brings it to your attention that there's been a whole lot of military men and women that come out of these hills and hollows of eastern Kentucky. Well, that'll do it for today. And if anybody has anything to add to these soldiers, and any more names, please contact me or my father, Glenn Brown. Thanks. Until next time.